A while back, I made some brioche buns, which I thought were pretty good. However, I think there is a variation that tops that. Let's make some potato buns.
Let's start with a potato. So I'm using a russet potato, but any potato should work. I don't think it really matters. But if you want me to see me do a comparison video on which potatoes to use for potato buns, let me know and I'll do that. But all I'm doing here is just peeling the potato and then kind of just scooping out any of the eyes on the potato. After you're done peeling your potatoes, go ahead and cut them down into about 1/2 inch cubes. The most important thing though is to cut them in uniform sizes so that they will cook evenly. Try not to go smaller than 1/2 inch, but try not to go bigger than 1 inch. I find that that's the ideal size to cook potatoes for mashed potatoes. Now go ahead and put them in a pot big enough to fit all of the potato pieces and big enough so that you can pour water in it to cover about, let's say 1/2 inch to 1 inch. You don't need to cover it that much. Get that on a stove and then we're going to go ahead and season it generously. And then we're going to put this on about medium high heat, level 8 for me. And you're going to boil these for about 10 to 15 minutes. For me, it took about 15 minutes from a boil. And to check that they're done is I just take a chunk of potato and just take a paring knife and just stab it. And if it goes in easily and goes out easily, that means it is done. Go ahead and strain that through a strainer. And what we're going to do afterwards is just leave it in the strainer or put it back in the pot so that one, the potatoes can have a chance to cool down, but two, to steam out to dry a bit because we don't want excess water in the dough. So let's leave this for about 5 to 10 minutes until cooled.
All right, so while the potatoes are cooling down, I want to talk about a couple of ways you can mash your potatoes. The first way, and I think the best way and easiest way, is to use a potato ricer. And what this will allow you to do is mash your potato down so that it's super smooth and super fine. Now, if you don't have a potato ricer, you can use a potato masher. And for potato buns, it's okay. And the reason why I say it's okay, because it does leave a little bit of lumps. So you can be very diligent about it and smash it down until it's smooth. Now, if you really care, you can use a sieve as well. Whatever method you decide to mash with, you can pass it through a sieve and then kind of strain out all the lumps. How restaurants do pomme puree, for example, they will pass it through a sieve to get that super silky smooth mashed potatoes. Now, I don't think it's necessary for this recipe, but if you do pass it through a sieve, it would make it a little bit more pleasant to eat. If not, it's not the end of the world. It'll still be delicious. It'll be fine.
With whatever tool you choose, go ahead and mash your potatoes. Now, the important thing to note is that we don't want any big lumps because big lumps will be harder to mix into the dough and it won't mix in as easily, which will result in a bun that has these potato lumps in it. We want this to be dispersed throughout the dough so that it can actually help the dough be soft and supple. Once you're done mashing the potatoes, go ahead and take a spatula and stir it through just to make sure everything is combined and also kind of making sure there's no big lumps. You just want to make sure everything is nice and small and fine. Now go ahead and scoop out about 1/2 cup or around 100 grams of mashed potatoes, and the rest you can save for something else. You can mix it with some cream, some milk to make mashed potatoes, whatever you want with it. But just remember to reserve 1/2 cup. Now for the dough part of the recipe. Let's start with some warm water, 100 degrees to about 110. If you don't have a thermometer, just use your fingers to feel it out. You want about bathtub temperature water. And go ahead and get this into a bowl. Now into that same bowl, we're going to add in some sugar and also some active dry yeast. We're going to give that a stir through just so that the yeast can dissolve. And then after we mix it through, we're going to let that yeast sit and activate for about 10 minutes. And you'll know that the yeast is active if it starts to puff. If it doesn't, you need new yeast.
So now I'm going to add in the milk powder. The reason I'm adding in milk powder is because I don't have milk. That's the only reason why I'm using milk powder. Now, if you have milk just use milk for the quantity of water I used. If not, you can just use water and milk powder. Or if you want it to be extra milky, you can use milk with milk powder. Up to you.
After your yeast has risen, we're going to add in the milk powder and then also 1 large egg. Go ahead and give it a mixy mix and just to make sure that the milk powder is dissolved all the way and the egg is beaten up thoroughly. A quick warning before we get to the dough. This dough will be very sticky. Now, if you don't have a stand mixer, you can do it by hand, but it'll be very tricky. If you want to see me do it by hand, let me know in the comments below and I'll make another video doing it without a stand mixer. Now back to the unpaid programming. To the bowl of your stand mixer, go ahead and add in your bread flour. Then go in with your salt, the mashed potato, and all of the liquids. Now get your dough hook and go ahead and attach that. The dough hook is the one that looks like a hook or it looks like a spirally looking thing. And in this stage, we're just going to mix it together until there's no more dried clumps or flour anywhere in the bowl and all the liquids have been absorbed. Now we're not kneading the dough, we're just bringing everything together. So mix it until everything comes together like this and there's no more dried clumps or flour at the bottom. We're going to let this rest for about 10 to 20 minutes. And oh yeah, cover it with a towel so it doesn't dry out.
All right, so I'm gonna let this dough rest for about 10 minutes, which is essentially the autolyse stage, if you're familiar with the terms. And what that means is we're just letting the dough hydrate, or I should say the flour hydrate through with the liquids we just added. And what that does is it allows the gluins to start forming so that later on when we go to knead it, it'll be easier. In about 10 minutes, I'll show you what that looks like. And so I'll see you back here.
So at this point, your autolyse stage should be done, and you can check by seeing how elastic your dough is. It shouldn't be super elastic, but it should have some elasticity like this, which means that it has hydrated thoroughly and that the dough has started a self-kneading process per se. So now we're gonna go ahead and knead this. I'll say it's about 5 minutes to start, but really because this is gonna be a super wet dough, you don't want to go by time, you want to go by how much gluten has formed. And you can check that by doing the window pane test, which I will show you in a bit. But essentially, you should be able to have a 1-inch window without ripping and almost see-through. So just to show you, if I take a piece now, this has been kneading for 5 minutes, by the way. And as you can see, I tried to do the window pane test here. Yeah, it's a little bit see-through, but it starts to rip just like that. That means that it is not ready yet. So I need it for about another minute or two. And as you can see now that the window pane is not ripping and I can kind of see through it. And so you just want to keep kneading it for about another minute until you get to this stage. And if you haven't gotten to the stage yet, just knead it at 1 minute intervals and just keep checking until you get this window pane. And when you finally finish kneading the dough, and only when you finish kneading the dough, you can go ahead and start to add in the butter. Now, I would only add the butter in about half a tablespoon to 1 tablespoon at a time. And this is to keep the emulsion and so that the dough and the butter won't split. And by doing it in steps like this, it makes it easier for the dough to absorb the butter. And you just add the butter, you knead it until the butter is fully absorbed into the dough, and once it is, you can go ahead and add in your next interval of butter, so half a tablespoon or 1 tablespoon. And you just keep repeating this process until you run out of butter. So once you've added in all your butter, your dough is gonna look a little bit crazy like this, and just remember that this is a super wet dough, so it's not gonna ball up like a normal dough would. But what you can do is get a bowl scraper like I am doing here, or using a silicone spatula. You can go ahead and scrape down the sides and the dough off of the dough hook and bring it all together to form a ball. So what you're going to do now is form this dough into a ball. Now what you want to do is come in with some damp hands, not super wet hands, just damp, and quickly working to kind of bring this dough together into a ball. And you just want the outer skin to be nice and taut so that it keeps its shape as it proofs. Now, We're going to prove this for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how warm your kitchen is. You just essentially want this to double in size. So for me, it took about an hour, but as you can see, my dough has doubled in size nicely. And all you're gonna do is go ahead and punch this down. And with a silicone spatula or a bowl scraper, go ahead and take this out of the bowl, making sure to scrape all of that dough out. I'm gonna go ahead and split these into 10, around 83 grams each. If you want these to be a little bit bigger, you can go ahead and split these into 6 or 8. I would not go any bigger than 6 because then they will be too big and too thick and it won't be pleasant to eat. You could do these smaller to turn them into dinner rolls if you want. This is a very versatile recipe. So if you want, go ahead and do that, but I'm gonna stick with 10. Because this dough is a little bit wetter than typical doughs, I'm gonna go ahead and do a different method of forming this into a ball, which is this slap and fold motion. It's not to knead the dough, but it's just to make it nice and taut and smooth. And once I have a smooth outer layer, I go ahead and take my bench scraper and kind of go under it and scrape it into itself to form a nice and tight ball. So I wanted to show you guys another angle just in case that first angle wasn't good. But essentially, again, what I'm doing is taking the dough and slapping it down to the counter and then immediately folding it over. And I'm just going to repeat this until the surface is nice and smooth and taut. We're not doing this to knead the dough. It's just to get the surface tight so that when it proofs, it holds its shape. And so once we get a smooth surface, you just take your bench scraper and go under it and scrape it towards itself, almost underneath and into itself, so that well, one, you fold in all the seams, and two, the ball is nice and tight. Once your dough balls are beautifully shaped like this, we're gonna go ahead and do the next step, which is you pressing down the dough balls so that they flatten out a little bit. Make sure your hands are a little bit damp, not wet, just damp. And what this is going to do is allow the doughs to proof a little flatter, so that when you go to bake these, they won't be ball shape. That's what I find happens when I don't press it down. And as you're pressing these down, if there's any big bubbles forming, go ahead and pop them so that they don't bake up and burn later on. And I just repeat this for all of the dough balls. And again, you don't really have to do this step, but I find that it gives a nicer hamburger bun shape if you do this. So after you've pressed them all down, if you notice any big bubbles, you can go ahead and pop those. But if they're small bubbles, you can leave them. But if you really want it to be aesthetically pleasing, then go ahead and go in with the needle and pop all those bubbles. And like you see on my buns, there's these little bubbles. I don't really care, so I leave them. It's really up to you. Whether or not you do it, it's still going to taste good. Anyways, cover these and let these proof for 30 to 45 minutes or until doubled in size. And in the meantime, preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Once your buns have proofed and your oven has heated, go ahead and brush on an egg wash. The egg wash is just one egg that I beat up. That's about it. The other thing to remember here is just to brush on your egg wash as evenly as possible, or else your buns might look a little splotchy. If you wanted a bun with sesame seeds, now would be the time to sprinkle it on. I don't really care for the sesame seeds on my bun, so I'm not going to put it on. So now it's time to bake these buns. Go ahead and bake them for about 20 to 25 minutes until they're nice and golden brown. If you have a thermometer, you can measure it. You're looking for a temperature of around 200 degrees. So like 195 to 200 or even 205 is fine. Once they're done, they should look beautiful like this, and just put them on a wire rack to cool down.
So they are still quite warm because I just took them out, so I didn't really let them rest like I should. So as you can see, here's the bun. It's very nice and fluffy and squishy. Let me get something to cut this. Look at the inside of this. It's very, very fluffy and soft. I don't really know how else to show you that it's fluffy and soft. It's very pillowy. It's a great base, I would say, for burgers, sandwiches, whatever. So if you notice on some of these, there's like little bubbles that popped up. I don't care enough to pop these bubbles, but if you care a lot about the aesthetics, you can go ahead and pop these little bubbles to make sure that they don't puff up like that. But to me, they're fine as long as they're not burnt. It's okay. I also want to say that the outside is nice and shiny. That's what you're looking for. Some of these are misshapen a little bit, but nice and round is also what you're looking for. I also think that these are perfect sizes for hamburgers. So if you want something bigger, you can split these into 8 instead of 10. Or if you want something even bigger than that, 6. But I've done these before where I split these into 8 and they're kind of thick. So if you like thick bread for your burger, then that's fine. But I think these are more perfect size. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know that it's been a while since I've posted anything, and this will be, I guess, my comeback video. Thank you to Mohammed310 for asking to make a recipe video on potato buns. That's pretty much why I made it. If you guys want to see me make anything else at all, leave it in the comments below. And of course, do all the things like, subscribe, hit the bell, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Thank you. Bye.